Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to another episode of Second Take Cinema, coming at you from the glorious Impala Films headquarters in sunny Southend-on-Sea. I am, as always, your host, Jamie Evans, and I am joined, as always, by Rory Jocelyn.
Hello, everybody.
Today, we are going on to the other side of the world, baby, all the way to East Asia. We're heading to South Korea, and we're travelling back in time to the year 1999, as we take a second take on Nowhere to Hide. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. Today we are talking about the 1999 Korean movie Nowhere to Hide, directed by Lee Myung-se. Apologies if I'm pronouncing any of these wrong, by the way. Starring Park Jung-hoon, An Sung-ki, Jang Dong-gun, and Choi Ji-woo. This film was released in 1999. I unfortunately don't have any budget information for it.
There's not a lot of information out there for this one.
No, it's a really obscure film. In fact, the only information I've got about its reception was that it was a hit at both the inaugural Asian Pacific Film Festival in Sydney and at the Sundance Film Festival, but its American release was limited, brief, and unsuccessful. That's literally what it says.
Wow.
So this was your pick, Rory. I'd never heard of this film before.
Awards? You going to mention the awards?
I've literally just read to you everything that was listed on Wikipedia.
Okay, so...
in the reception section.
Oh, okay, so awards is another section.
Oh, okay. Usually they smush them together.
No, in this case they haven't. So, at the Deauville Asian Film Festival 2000, or Festival du Film Asiatique de Deauville.
2000!
2000! It won the jury prize, it won best photography, it won best actor, and it won best director.
Best actor for who? The main guy?
For Park Jung-hoon.
Yeah, the main guy.
Yeah. Jang Dong-gun won the best supporting actor at the Blue Dragon Film Awards for his role as Detective Kim, who's the one who kills a man and has sad time. So... yeah, what's weird about this, so it was incredibly successful in Asia, but was unsuccessful during its limited American release, which is probably why it's sort of fallen into obscurity. Asians don't really care too much about high-definition transfers of stuff. They don't really give a damn. Whereas America has a lot of collectors that do, which... what's annoying is I tried to find a higher quality transfer of this film than the DVD I own, and it just does not exist.
Right.
Because there's not enough of an American audience to request it, it doesn't get the transfer it deserves.
Right.
Which is why you find like obscure, terrible films get like high definition and 4K transfers, because they released in America and had at least enough cult base to get the transfer.
Right, I see.
But in Asia, they care so little about the quality.
That's really surprising, because you always think of like Japan and Korea and stuff of being really tech heavy countries.
They are, but you've got to remember that everything is small, so they tend to have small TVs. So they don't.
Are they not part of the big widescreen craze?
They've got widescreen, but they don't like their TVs aren't like 65-inch plasmas or 65-inch OLEDs nowadays. No, they don't really have that sort of scale because their houses are so small. So they will like if you're only watching it on a small screen, what's it matter anyway? I suppose is the idea.
Yeah, I can appreciate that.
But anyway, my background with this film.
Yeah, when did you first see this movie?
I can't remember the year, but it was.
Well, you saw you then.
I'll go home. It was probably about 2004, 2005 sort of time. It had a very limited run English DVD release, which is the one that I bought and still have. Now, I got this film because I'd heard of it from being a bit of a fan of The Matrix, and people talking about the fact that certainly in The Matrix Reloaded, the third Matrix film, Revolution, sorry, they'd stolen a load of camera shots from this film.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so I was like, well, I want to see the film that inspired the Wachowskis' camera work, because the Wachowskis are certainly known for style, if not anything else. They're well known for their stylish filmmaking.
Agreed.
And this film definitely fits that bracket of being a stylish film in a different way to The Matrix. It doesn't look like The Matrix. But, yeah, you could tell there were definitely several camera shots stolen from this film by the Wachowskis, such as the bit at the end of Matrix Revolutions where Agent Smith clasps his hand into a fist in the rain.
Oh, yeah.
Completely stolen from this film. Now, this film came out about the same time as the first Matrix.
I would imagine that that's been done loads of times.
It's well known that there's quite a few shots from Matrix.
Oh no, I know
from this film.
I know because I know the lobby shootout scene in the first Matrix is apparently carbon copied from another Asian film.
Yeah,
I don't remember which one.
The Wachowskis were obviously big on Asian cinema and stuff.
Yeah, well, they were massively into anime, weren't they?
Yeah, that's true.
But in
Ghost
terms
in
of
the
a
Shell and things like that.
But in terms of a shot of someone clasping a fist in the rain, that's got to have been done before.
Not in the same way as it was done in this, and then copied in. Like it's the movement of the camera and the way it focuses in on the hand.
Yeah,
it is quite specific. It's just that in this it looks a bit more blue, and in the Matrix Revolutions it looks a bit more green.
Right.
Anyway, I watched this film. I loved it because I'm a big fan of style, and when I was. How old would I have been then? I wouldn't have even been 16 yet. So I probably would have been about 15. So the depth of a story, did interest me, but I wasn't quite as refined a gentleman, let's say, at 15 as I am now. So I instead, I just got obsessed with the stylishness of this film. Mm-hmm. The music dragged me in. A couple of tracks in particular really dragged me in, which is the ones with the guitars.
Not the Bee Gees.
No, the Bee Gees didn't do it for me. I mean, it's good. It works in its place, but it's kind of it feels out of sorts with the rest of the soundtrack. We'll get to that later.
Definitely.
Because most of this soundtrack has quite a gritty guitarish sort of tone to it, and the Bee Gees song "Holiday" isn't that. It's quite the opposite. It's almost more of an a cappella. But yeah, so I love the style of it. I love the fact that it was so different. It's almost like a series of vignettes of what can we do for this scene that will make it look interesting, and then what can we do for this scene to make it look interesting. And there's a long unbroken shot of a guy chasing a man through the docks that I always remembered. It's one of my favourite scenes in the film, and I just always felt that was a something that I would want to not necessarily recreate, but homage to that idea of watching a guy actually get knackered to hell sprinting. Like you've seen it in all the films. You see Tom Cruise. We know Tom Cruise will sprint everywhere. In fact, it's probably in his contract, must sprint in every film.
Oh yeah.
He's man disabled in wheelchair, but he'll find a reason to sprint by the end of the film. It's that sort of Days of Thunder is actually exactly that. He ends up in a wheelchair. And then,
does he?
Yeah. And then he ends up sprinting at some point later in the film. But yeah, so basically but in this case, it was literally one take, unbroken. You see the guy get more knackered as the sprint goes on. I'd never seen that done in a film before. That may have been because of my limited knowledge of film at the time, but it was certainly different for the 90s. Usually everything is chopped up by multiple takes. So yeah, I found it really interesting, but I haven't watched it in about 15 years.
Yeah.
Because I went over to Blu-ray, this didn't come out, I've never found it again, and it ended up in a box, not being watched. So I pulled it out for this, and actually I'm glad I did. I wanted to see if it held up, what my thoughts were on the story, what I'd think about the style now, and also to see what you think, Jamie. So I'll let you kick off on, if you have any history, and if you don't, what your thoughts were.
No, I've got no history with this film. I'd never even heard of it. I have seen some Asian cinema, mostly in the horror genre, although a little outside of the horror genre as well. For example, 20th Century Boys, which is a fantastic trilogy of Japanese movies that are, I don't know what genre you'd call them. They're a little bit sci-fi, a little bit action, a little bit adventure. I guess even a little bit horror. Some of it is quite disturbing. In terms of Korean, specifically Korean cinema, my only familiarity with Korean cinema is Train to Busan.
Okay.
If you've heard of Train to
No, I have
Busan,
not.
it's very good. It's getting an American remake called Train to New York, I think, which I'm sure will be terrible. It's a zombie movie, and it's really interesting because it was made in 2016, by which point it was like, okay, we've done everything we can possibly do with zombies now. What can we do that we haven't done already? And Korea went, how about zombies on a train? And it's surprisingly effective.
Okay.
Because there's no space. So you actually end up with a scene which is going to sound humorous when I describe it, but it's actually really tense, where there's like 5 survivors crammed into a train toilet, like a little toilet, and they daren't leave.
Yeah.
Because there's zombies everywhere. And it's very claustrophobic.
Yeah.
I'm due for a rewatch of Train to Busan because I can't remember how it ends. But yeah, I mean, this is more in a tradition of, it's not a martial arts film, but it's closer to a martial arts film than, say, Train to Busan.
It's an action movie, for sure.
And that's not my genre. I'm not into action movies really at all. And interestingly enough, we'll talk later about how this has got elements in it that echo, I felt, Sam Raimi, who's one of my favourite directors, but I enjoy it when Sam Raimi does it because it's more fantastical, and I didn't enjoy it in this because it's real people, quote unquote.
Sure.
And that took some of the enjoyment out of it for me. But let's start by talking about the opening, because the opening feels very separate from the rest of the movie.
Yeah.
The opening is in black and white, but it's not just black and white. It's like a really gritty, low-quality black and white.
On the better quality rip that I found, after we'd already watched it, that opening scene looks basically the same. Like, the rest of it looks visibly better.
Yeah.
That opening scene just looks the same.
I honestly, watching the opening scene, I honestly thought, because as I said, I don't know what budget this was made for, and even if I knew what budget it was made for, I don't know what that translates to in American dollars. But looking at that scene, I was watching it and going, oh shit, this must have like Blair Witch Project level budget.
It is really,
which is like £15,000.
But I think they do that on purpose to make it look more gritty.
Yeah, they must have had some money because they afforded a Bee Gees song, unless they spent all the money on the Bee Gees.
Though, what's interesting about the intro, actually starting off in black and white, so basically the black and white intro introduces us to the 2 main cops, which is Wu, Detective Wu, who is the main character, really. He goes around beating people up.
He has a hat on, doesn't he? I don't know what the name of those types of hats is.
Oh, a bucket hat.
You always see fishermen wearing
bucket
them.
hat.
Yeah.
And you've got Detective Kim, who is a younger man, a much more good-looking sort of guy.
He's got a family at home.
Yeah, but he's kind of a much more quieter man. He's not anywhere near as violent, unless the situation actually really calls for it. But Detective Wu will become violent at a moment's notice.
Yeah, to a cartoonish extent.
Oh, yeah.
I was surprised that this wasn't based on a manga or an anime.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the film is played like it is.
Yes.
There's a lot of real... I mean, we'll talk about the camera work later, because the camera work definitely mimics anime a lot. But the actual acting style as well, there's a lot of that exaggerated expression, exaggerated movements, and just things that you could easily picture in anime, particularly from Detective Wu. He's the main one for it.
Yeah.
Because he will literally go from moping and being like, oh, to being like, ay-ya-da-da.
Yeah, his face... He's got a very expressive face.
Very expressive. And I think that actor is quite big in Korea.
Yeah.
I think he's very well known. But like the glee on his face when he like pulls out a baseball bat or something like that.
You know he's going to enjoy the beating.
Yeah.
What's interesting with that intro is that I can't recall that being done prior to this film, but that idea was done again in a much, much, much more famous film, Casino Royale. where the intro of Bond is black and white. He beats the guy up in the toilet. It's really gritty, more gritty than the rest of the film. And then after he gets his license, yes, considerably kills the guy in the head. Then it's back to color, and now we're doing a more traditional style Bond film.
Yeah.
I can't say that Casino Royale took the idea from this film because I have no idea. But I do think that there's the potential that filmmakers have seen this film more so than general audiences.
Whoa.
And it may have influenced a lot of other films in the way that... Because it's, as you say, it's an action film, but it's kind of... If you took pieces of it, you'd think they're from art house films.
Yeah, and everything I read online, because I was actually trying to look for a plot summary, because I thought I'd maybe missed something, because the film is very thin on plot.
Yes.
And I was like, I must have missed something, or like not understood or something. And I couldn't find any plot summaries for it. All I could find was this phrase people kept using, which was that it's less of a film and more a celebration of filmmaking.
Yeah.
Because it does feel like someone experimenting a lot and not necessarily caring about the actual film they're making. So, like, they care about the pieces, but not the whole.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, the storyline is... Let's talk about story then, because we're just going to keep hitting that until we tell it. And it's not going to take us very long.
No, a murder happens and cops try to solve it.
Yeah, so there's a guy outside of a building with an umbrella, gets sliced down in the middle of the rain by an assassin.
In a very anime sequence.
Yeah.
Really, it's almost still images that fade over each other.
Yeah,
and then when he actually slashes him, you get like that flash.
Yeah.
And then there's like a moment, and then the blood starts to trickle down his hand.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, I've seen stuff like this before. This is literally right out of anime.
Yeah. And the only witness to it gets beaten to death in the street by a bunch of, like, I guess, thugs who are working with the assassin. They're important because they are obviously the people that the police chase to get to the assassin.
Yeah.
And all of the vignettes we get are about them, you know, how we capture this guy. I think Fishhead is the first guy.
Fishhead's the first
and
one,
then they go to the boxer
Meathead.
guy, Meathead, and then they build their way up until they get to...
Shinmin. Chung Shinmin.
Yeah. Now, basically, that's it. They beat people up to get to the assassin, and then it finishes off in a fist fight.
It's almost a Street Fighter-like structure, isn't it?
Yeah.
Where you're just beating opponents to work your way up to the villain.
Yeah, you could imagine it as a one-on-one fighting game from the era, actually, like the storyline progression. Yeah. And then, like, in the end, there's a fist fight, and... basically, that's it. I'd give you more plot about romances or family relations or blah, 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 but they're really thin and basically not really that important.
I don't think we learn anything at all about Detective Wu.
We see his sister. He goes to his sister's house and
Right.
she says, shouldn't you, and her husband, who clearly doesn't like him, says, aren't you old enough? Aren't you too old for this? Shouldn't you be married by now? And she gives him some gloves. She goes, I bought these for you last year. I don't know if they'll still fit. I don't know why his hands would have changed size in a year, but whatever. I don't know if they'll still fit. Please take them. He's like, no, give them to your husband. You know, I don't, you know, he obviously doesn't think much of himself. She forces him to take the gloves. And then he does another anime style moment where he walks away, turns around, looks at her kind of like, almost like he longs to that he could be part of a normal life like that. Almost a sadness. He then turns away. And then he turns back with that cartoonish grin, like, and then waves a bye, and then runs off, like, kind of happy and ecstatic that he's got a gift.
Yeah.
And that's something, again, you'd imagine in an anime. A character will turn around, look sad, turn away, come back, yay, see you later, sis.
He feels, I don't know if this was intentional on the part of the actor, he feels very unhinged for the whole film.
I think that's on
like
purpose.
He's on the edge of a breakdown.
What I could find, I haven't seen any of the rest of the director's work. This is the only action movie he ever made by what I could find.
Right.
The other movies that he made were romances and dramas. So this was very much out of left field for this director. And I think that kind of shows in the fact that it is so experimental with what it does visually. The storyline isn't experimental, but certainly what they do with each sequence is. And that in itself, I mean, the thing is, the gloves lead to the next part where Detective Kim has killed someone. He feels like he feels all alone. He doesn't understand, like, am I a bad person?
Yeah.
Now I've had to kill someone in the line of duty. And because he's wearing the gloves, Detective Wu is able to keep just throwing snowballs at him to piss him off. And, like, he pisses him off to the extent that it makes him cheer up again.
Yeah.
Which is a nice moment.
Let's break it down and go vignette by vignette.
Yeah.
So the first real section then is them going after Fishhead. So let's talk about that. It starts with them turning up at this nightclub, and what I thought was a fairly effective way of hiding the fact that you can't afford to film in a nightclub.
Yeah.
It's just still images almost.
Yeah, on a black background.
Super whited out.
Really contrasty.
And flashing white in between them, so you almost get a strobe effect.
Yeah. But they're clearly not in a club. You could do this in like a small
black
set.
box studio. Yeah. But it gets the message across perfectly well, and actually was arguably preferable to them going into a club and having loud music and because it's not necessary. The club itself isn't necessary
because all they're doing is seeing Fishhead enjoy himself in the club.
Yeah,
and you get that in like a brief 6 or 7 still photos.
Yeah.
In a way you would have done, but it would have taken them at least a good minute and a half to walk around the club, at least go, oh yeah, he's enjoying himself. He'll be out in a minute. You didn't need that. It was a nice way to save time and pace.
Yeah. The bit that's necessary is when Fishhead comes out.
Yeah.
And Wu's got a history with Fishhead, and he's like, oh, come here. Fishhead takes off running, and this is the section you were talking about where it's one long tracking shot following them as they run in real time.
Yes.
And I noticed Fishhead's like constantly looking back. I was like, dude, you'd probably get much further ahead if you just focused on where you were running, But
like, when you talk about their cartoonish natures, this is a good example of, like, each character in this film has a very different and unique running animation, as I'll call it, to each other, which is something you'd normally say about anime, or they've animated each one to,
Fishhead's fucking pumping his arms like he's the T-1000 in fucking Terminator 2, isn't he?
It's more of a comedy thing, because I've seen it
It's kind of how Mario runs.
Yeah, it is. It's cartoonish. It's comic. He's a comedy character.
Yeah.
And that's expressed by the way he runs. His arms go all the way up above his head, like, as he runs, because he's ridiculous. And then you've got Kim, who's more like a dog chasing him almost. His arms are always...
Woo, you mean?
Woo, sorry, yeah. His arms are always in front of him. He's almost punching.
Almost like he's shoulder barging his way through a crowd, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's so they're very much, even though they're dressed differently as well, you can easily discern who someone is by the way they move, which is an interesting and fascinating way of looking at the performance. The other side as well, though, is I love the bit in this scene. Wu catches up to Fishhead at one point, about halfway through the sequence. Fishhead turns around, sees him, and then just somehow manages to pull away by running faster. Always makes me laugh.
Very cartoonish.
It is very cartoonish, but it works.
And they finally catch him, beats him up a little bit.
Oh, beats him up severely in the police station.
And he's like, no, that's Meathead.
Right.
Fishhead is like...
yeah, you're right, sorry, yeah.
Fishhead's like, no, I don't do that. I just sell drugs. Yeah. I don't kill people. I just sell drugs. And he ends up giving them Meathead's name.
Yeah.
Which is our next vignette, is Meathead. And this was my favourite bit of the film.
Yeah?
Because this is the bit where the Sam Raimi comparisons come in.
Sure.
So Meathead's like a boxing-type youth in a hoodie. And this fight is as anime as the film gets, to the point where they do the thing where when they're both throwing their punches, it does that thing where you get like a background effect that's like zipping lights.
Yeah.
So it makes it look like they're punching dead fast. When he hits Wu flies back, clearly on a wire, but flies back like 20 feet across the roof.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, is this a superhuman? It's not. No,
it's just
that
punch was somehow that powerful.
And they then end up, and this was my favourite bit of the whole film because I'm cheesy, they end up behind a big white screen, and we're watching their silhouettes fight each other.
Yeah.
And this was giving me such Sam Raimi vibes, because it really reminded me of Army of Darkness, when Bruce Campbell is fighting the mini Bruce Campbells that are on a projection screen. That's the way they've done it.
Yeah.
It's a similar sort of thing. Obviously, in Army of Darkness, you're not meant to know that's how they've done it, whereas in this, it's part of the scene.
Yeah.
But it had that Three Stooges comedy vibe, where they're literally like, they are doing a routine more than they're actually fighting. Yeah, because when they both fall down, they both kick their legs up in sync. Did you notice?
Yeah.
And the music's almost like.
Well, there's a bit as well when, like, after they've done a bit of punching of each other. I think it's just before the moment you mentioned. They're like grappling. And and suddenly the music goes from being an action music to being like a an Italian classical dance.
Yes. Yeah.
And then
it's clear that they were having a lot of fun making this.
Yes.
Now, we then get more violent, as you say, when they've arrested him. They get more, and this was the first big surprise of the film for me, because at this point I was going, oh, okay, I see what's going on here. He's a violent, loose cannon detective, a sort of a Dirty Harry figure who's taking the law into his own hands. What surprised me is once he gets Meathead to the police station, there's no interrogation room. He just interrogates him in the middle of the main room. And it turns out all the cops are violent sociopaths.
Yeah, so...
And there's that bit where they're all pulling the shutters down, and then they all pull, like, baseball bats or rulers or various weapons and attack him. And this is where I want to talk about why the comedy both works and doesn't. They literally do a beat down on Meathead to the point where, when we next see Meathead, he's literally got footprints drawn on his face.
Yeah, where they've been kicking.
As if they've stomped his face so hard. And on the one hand, it works really well because it's this cartoon violence, which is quite funny. Comparing it to Army of Darkness, because that's what it reminded me of, it's funnier in that because Ash is doing stuff like that to Deadites, which aren't real.
Yeah.
This felt a little bit, and I'm probably reading too much into it, but this felt a little weird because, and obviously I'm aware the film's over 20 years old now and from a different culture. Watching it as a Westerner in 2023, where police brutality is such a huge issue that's all over the news all the time, it's really... it dampens the fun a bit. Yeah. Because on the one hand, you're like, oh, cartoon violence. On the other hand, you're like... because it's not just that they're violent. They're also bad police officers.
Oh, yeah.
Like, when he's reading him his Miranda rights, he literally forgets them and just says, tell the lawyer I said them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he's got another line where he says police can do whatever they want and have license to do whatever is necessary to catch criminals.
And no one stops him at any point from doing any of the violence he does, and they join in, as you say. There's a bit where, because Meathead won't give up the assassin, he, like, I think he ties his hand, binds his arms and legs to, like, a rod.
Oh, and then he's banging his head on the floor.
Yeah, so he's swinging underneath, and he's just basically tipping him by his feet, so his head smacks against the floor constantly. Yeah. And you're like... again, the scenario is funny in terms of it being like such obscene, silly violence. Yeah. But when it's the idea of a cop beating down... he's not even a suspect at this point, really. He's being questioned. You're like, oh! And this comes in a bit later as well, because there is a point where they find a girl who is in a relationship with the assassin.
And is this when she says, is it normal for police to just burst into women's homes?
That's the second time he breaks in. Right. But yeah, she does say that too eventually.
I think he says yes, doesn't he?
Yeah, he does, yeah. It's like, yeah, of course. But they break into her house, and she's not a criminal of herself. She's not a combatant. Like, it's not a situation where it's like, of course you can slap this woman about because she's a violent attacker. She's not that. She's just an informant who knows the assassin and has some communication with them. There is a scene where he basically jump kicks her in the face.
Yeah.
And it's not like, oh, we misread the scene. He literally jump kicks her in the face. And you're like, oh, You can do that as a cop. Like, and here's the thing: it's not pro violence against women either. Because when he takes out Fishhead, the reason he gets so pissed off with Fishhead before he chases him is because Fishhead is beating this woman up. He's going, "I paid for you already, didn't I? If I can get in the car, I'm going to do what I want." And he's sitting there going, "No, I've got to keep quiet." And eventually he just can't because it's like, fuck this guy. So he gets out the car and confronts Fishhead before he was supposed to.
Yeah.
Which is why Fishhead has the opportunity to escape. But then in this scene, he just drop kicks this woman in the face. Now, she's pissed him off, but that doesn't make it acceptable. She's not a combatant. She's not a criminal. She's, an informant that you're trying to press for answers. Again, doesn't read well. Yeah. Bear in mind that we're still meant to, even though he's a flawed character, we're still meant to feel compassionate and sort of sympathise with Detective Wu. Drop kicking innocent women in the face, not a good place to start.
No, and partially I guess it's just because I didn't expect this. Like I knew nothing about this film except it was Korean and it was an action movie.
Yeah.
About detectives. So this wasn't the sort of film I was expecting. I'll give it that. And maybe I need to go back and see it again with that in mind.
Yeah.
Because it made it very hard to get into that clash of tone.
Yeah.
But yeah.
But I've never seen a film like it.
No.
It's quite different. There's certain films that, like Dirty Harry, as you said, where you're like, okay, well, you've got the cop who goes a bit too hard, but in the attempt to do the right thing.
Yeah.
Etc. etc. But this is an assassin that they're chasing, and he has murdered someone. But they never try and chase up who we murdered him for.
Yeah, we never find a motive, do we?
No, it's just like, oh, he's murdered a guy, we've got to kill him. But, the guy's clearly just... It wasn't personal.
Yeah.
So, if he's killed a man and it's not personal, yeah, they catch the assassin at the end. But who ordered the hit? No one ever questions that. Because that's not what the story... That's not the story that the film is interested in. It's just, we caught the bad guy.
Yeah. There's a pretty good set piece on a train.
Yes.
Where they come close to catching the villain. And he's kind of moving from seat to seat. And they're undercover, pushing the food carts and stuff, aren't they?
Yeah.
And you end up with Detective Kim confronting him. And you get a very nice shot, actually. The bit in the middle of a train where the two cars connect.
Yes.
And you've got the assassin framed in one door and Kim framed in the other.
Yes.
And they have a standoff. And basically, the assassin ends up shanking Kim.
Yeah, he wins that fight, doesn't he?
So Kim ends up in the hospital.
Which is then the motivation for Wu to really have the beatdown against the assassin in the final scenes.
Yeah, and it kind of feels like the only reason they gave Kim a family is so that it would be even sadder, because you never see the family.
No, they're never on screen. We see
you just
him
talk to them on the phone.
Yeah.
And it feels like they've done that just so that Wu can be like, he had a family, damn it.
He was a family man.
Family guy.
Yeah. But, okay, so what about the final fight scene in the rain?
I was going to say, this is the bit that's gone foggy for me, is what happens between the train fight and then this final fight.
Yeah, I find that foggy as well. I
can't remember any of it.
What happens at that point is he goes back to the woman who is connected to the assassin.
Yeah.
That's when he drop kicks her in the face.
Yeah.
And that's also when she says, "Is it okay? Is it?" Because he goes to her house, knocks on the door. There's no one there, so he breaks the window.
Right.
He can open the door, let himself in, and then while he's buggering about trying to find information, she comes home with her friend.
Right.
She then receives a letter, which is the way she normally gets information from the assassin, with a number to call. Basically, dials into an answer phone, and then listen to the answer phone message, and that will be the message he's left for her. What ends up happening is Wu dials the number in, gets the call, and he goes, "You have one new message." She takes the phone from him, listens to the call, and then presses the button to erase it, before Detective Wu gets to hear what it is. So Wu drop kicks her in the face because she's deleted the message.
Yeah.
This causes the friend to freak out as well as the woman, because before that point she was kind of like, what are you doing in my house? Oh, you policemen think you can do whatever. After being drop kicked in the face, she's a little bit more pliable, which is not a good thing necessarily, but it is what the film shows us.
Yeah.
And so the best friend is just like, oh, just do what he wants, make the call that you've been told to make at the location you've been told to make it. He again gets the call that she's to bring a certain amount of money to a train yard to hand off to the assassin so the assassin can leave. Wu goes instead, follows him. The assassin goes on a bicycle and is being followed right up the arse, by the way, by Detective Wu in his Jeep. Like, he's giving him no distance. There's no subtlety in this hunt.
No.
At this point. And they end up having this fight in the train yard.
In the rain.
The rain, which is... it
getting
looks
dumped
amazing.
in loads of really dirty puddles, doesn't
mate, it's really muddy, really oily as well.
What's interesting as well is the villain absolutely kicks the living shit out of him.
He wins, yeah.
Like, the villain wins. All Wu succeeds in doing is delaying him long enough for the rest of the cops to get there.
Yeah. Which is a good strategy, because he knows he can take it. But
it felt odd. After how much violence it had shown, it felt odd that they just arrest him. It felt more like they should all... Because it's a wall of cops, isn't it?
Yeah. You thought they would have shot the shit out of him. But...
I thought we were going to get him, like, blood in the rain sort of thing. Like, always like Platoon, when Willem Dafoe gets... I honestly did. I thought we were going to get that in the rain.
Yeah.
With this guy just going down.
But no, they arrest him and happy ending.
Yeah, well, I guess it's kind of not in a way, isn't it? Because he goes to see Detective Kim in the hospital and says, oh, we're not getting any credit for having caught him.
Yeah, it all goes to the top brass. And he says, actually, that they glamorise the villains more than they glamorise the people that caught them.
Which is true.
Yeah.
My argument, and the thing is, I've seen things like that argument before. I feel like this doesn't have the right to make that argument because your good guy is a villain as well.
Yeah, because he's... committing police brutality.
Yeah, just because he's got a badge.
Yeah,
doesn't excuse what he's doing.
So that's interesting as well, because they actually reference that point in the film. At one point in the film, someone asked Detective Wu why he's a cop. I think it's the girlfriend of the assassin, and she
yes, it is.
Yeah, she goes, so why did you become a cop? And he says, well,
tried everything else first.
Yeah, I tried to do any other job, like be a fishmonger, and this I was too violent for it. And my dad eventually told me, you're such a thug that the only option you've really got left is you're going to become a gangster or a thug.
Or a cop.
Yeah, so you're better off becoming a cop, because at least that way you've got a badge to do it.
Which says two things to me. One, his dad's a schmuck. Because if you could do one of those two things, why pick the one that's not going to make you any money? And two, it says a lot about the attitude to cops in Korea, that they and gangster are on the same level.
Yeah, so I mean, it may be something that's specific about Asia, that gangsters and police officers are not. We're not too dissimilar, you and I, because in Japan you've got the police and the yakuza. You've got the triads and obviously the police in China. I can't remember what the Jingweun, I think they're called.
I don't know.
Or there's no, they might just be the triads. I think it's
triads are China.
Triads are China.
Triads are definitely China.
Yeah, so there is essentially there is a Korean mafia.
Right.
And it seems to be something that's very specific in Asia, where your mafia are essentially your flip coin to your police service. Whereas in the West...
Well,
I know they were in the West, but
back in New York, like the Italian mafia, that for a time they weren't they? Because a lot of the police were on the take from them.
Well, they also kept people safe in a way that...
They did their protection rackets, yeah.
But it wasn't just protection rackets, they would keep people safe, quote unquote, because like old women were safe walking in the middle of the night in the dark alley, because if anyone dared beat up an old lady, it wasn't the police you'd answer to necessarily, you might have to fucking answer to the mafia, and they were a lot less nice. In the West, we tended to, even though that was true for a time, it became considered quite bad taste. So eventually, like, the mafia obviously exists to a small degree, but it's not. And you wouldn't sit there and go, in America, mafia and police are basically the same thing, two sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
You would have done in the 40s, you wouldn't do now.
Yeah.
And I think Japan is at that point. From what I've heard, that they're doing quite a lot to try and push out the Yakuza. The police are really cracking down. But yeah, it seems to be in Asia they're a bit further back on doing that, whether you consider that forward thinking or backwards thinking. But in Korea, with this film, it would seem to be that they are more or less two sides of the same coin, because both are fucking violent.
Yeah.
Like, if this film is to be believed, the police are allowed to kick 9 types of shit out of you to get an answer.
Yeah.
Whereas in the West, we don't allow for that. Not just because
there's that bit.
it's been proven that people will say anything under duress.
Torture, yeah. Because there's that bit where, not to work backwards, but that bit we were on about where he's got Meathead hanging upside down and he keeps slamming his head into the thing.
Yeah.
He's deliberately confusing him because he keeps deliberately rewording his question.
Yeah.
He keeps going, so you were the only one there. No, you weren't there. Yes. So you were there.
Yeah.
He keeps...
Yeah.
And, yeah.
Which, imagine doing that in the police force in the West. You'd hopefully be removed from your job.
One hopes. I think recent events have proven it doesn't work as well as it should.
No, that's true enough. Yeah, I mean, Korean cinema, I've not seen a lot of Korean cinema. As far as South Korean cinema is concerned, I've seen this, obviously. I watched the South Korean remake of The Ring, which was basically just a beat-for-beat remake of the Japanese Ring, so it didn't seem to have any point. But even that was a bit gritty in terms of... It seemed a bit low, but it was lower budget. But also, I think... if I remember correctly, the police were a bit more of a threat in that version. I'll have to watch it again to remember. But then there's also... But most people in the West have seen something Korean by now, which is Squid Game.
Squid Games, yeah.
Squid Game is another show which shows just how brutal narrative storytelling is in South Korea.
Was a surprise hit that came out of nowhere, didn't it?
Yeah, there's been quite a few South Korean successes on Netflix. It seems to be that South Korean cinema is having a bit of an appreciation in the sun at the moment, which is good. It's good. But I find their storytelling tends to be a bit more gritty by default. It tends to be a bit nastier. It's colder. People die, will get fucked. That's where you go. Like, Squid Game is quite cold. This is quite cold.
Yeah.
Too violent.
I haven't seen Squid Game yet, but everything I know about it kind of reminds me of a slightly more complicated version of Saw.
If you cross Saw with Battle Royale, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, I mean, Battle Royale's pretty gruesome, but there's something a bit more glossy about Japanese cinema than Korean cinema, I find.
Higher budget, maybe?
Slightly higher budget. So I just think, yeah, there is a difference in their cultures, obviously, even though they're both, South Asian.
Yeah.
Southeast
like,
Asian.
There's a difference between us and France, isn't there?
Yeah.
And you can literally see, if you're stood on the south coast of Britain, you can literally look across the channel and it's right there.
Yeah, there's France. Hi, France. There is a difference in, because when Japanese do violence, it can be gritty. I don't know. It feels like when the Japanese do violence, it's shown to be as a bad thing. Whereas in this, the violence is shown almost in a positive light sometimes.
Yeah,
and I think
really
that's
weird.
The grittiness I'm talking about. That's different. I've seen
the morality is more blurred.
That's the one. That's where I'm going.
Yeah, I'm not sure there's much more to say about this movie. I would be interested in seeing more Korean cinema going forward. I can't imagine I'll ever watch this again, particularly, because I didn't.
There's nothing in the
I
narrative.
didn't like it really.
Oh, really?
I found it interesting.
Yeah.
I didn't like it. There's a difference.
Okay.
Maybe I'd just watch the fight scene with Meathead again because that was funny.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of those films, because it's all style and no substance, when I rewatch it, I usually want... I want to see the core parts of it again, like the core action pieces again. It's because the plot doesn't really have much layers to it. Watching the whole thing from start to finish for its plot isn't the main reason to watch it again.
No.
What I find interesting is it is more of an art piece, but in action, which is not the genre for art pieces.
Not traditionally, no.
No, and I can't. This is why I can't think of another film that's exactly like it, because there are other films that have shades from it, like Dirty Harry has shades of the sort of gritty cop being a bit over violent to do the right thing. Assassinations have happened in action movies for fucking decades. That's not new. The police, even the police brutality of it is, we've seen that in older films. And we've seen stylish cinema as well. Let's not, other films of, Sin City has a cartoonish sort of element to the way it's designed. That came out after this, but nonetheless, we've seen this, like, all these pieces before, but not in this arrangement.
Yeah.
Which to me makes it a quite unique piece. I do like this film. I think it's more recommendable for filmmakers than it is general audiences.
100%. This is not, despite the fact this is an action film, you wouldn't go up to your average diehard enjoyer and be like, hey, watch this movie.
Yeah.
Because they'd watch it and go, this is fucking stupid.
Yeah, I mean, so Army of Darkness would be something that would be seen by at least horror fans, if nothing else, but as well as having a bigger audience than that. But certainly if you're a fan of horror, you would have seen Army of Darkness.
Yeah.
Because it's a poster child of that genre.
Yeah.
Whereas
Which is ironic, because it's not really a horror film, Army of Darkness.
No, it's more of a comedy fantasy.
Yeah. That's the fascinating thing. It's because of its connection to Evil Dead, it is always associated as a horror.
Yeah.
But there's very little actual horror, other than, I guess, they're kind of... But even
it's more
even
like
then,
a Halloween horror, like, not Halloween the movie,
that's
but
the
like,
thing.
Spooky, scary skeletons.
Because only the first few Deadites, the fresh ones, have got, like, flesh. Once you get past that midway point, they are literally just puppet skeletons.
Yeah.
Like the fucking things from Golden Axe.
Yes.
Which I'm not going to lie, it's probably why... Because I saw Army of Darkness as a kid. Well,
Right.
a fairly young kid.
Yeah.
That's probably why I loved it so much. Because I was literally like, it's Ash from Evil Dead fighting the skeletons from Golden Axe.
That's a
all
cool
I
headcanon.
needed was Deathbringer to turn up.
Nice. So Army of Darkness, if you are a fan of horror, I could at least recommend Army of Darkness, for example, because it's part of that canon. Most people know it. With this film, if you're an action fan, it's not martial arty enough to fit into a martial arts canon. So if you watch every flipping Jet Li, Bruce Lee, Jackie Chan, etc., martial arts film, if I went, watch Nowhere to Hide, you'd be sitting there, there's not really all that much martial arts in it. They're fight scenes, but it's not really martial arts. If I was to go, action fans, I know you like Die Hard, I know you like this, they'd watching, there's no big explosive buildings, there's no, there's
The
none of
violence
that.
doesn't feel real.
Yeah.
Because, we talked about how Meathead literally gets his face stomped. But he's actually fine.
Yeah.
Other than just the
Some
boot
paint on
marks
his
on his
face.
face, he's fine. In actual fact, if you took a beating that bad,
Your face would
wouldn't
be a bit crushed.
well, yeah, he wouldn't be getting up and walking around.
And you wouldn't be making jokes about him.
No,
it'd
he'd be
be
spitting up teeth and shit.
Yeah. There's also... You couldn't recommend it for action, but even police dramas. It doesn't... The story isn't deep enough to hold your attention as a cop drama.
Yeah. There's no process of investigation, really.
No, it's...
Their
and the
investigation
investigation is brutal.
Yeah, their investigation is beat up each henchman enough that they spill the beans on the next henchman.
Yeah.
Until you get to the top of the chain.
Yeah.
It's a very odd film.
Yeah, it doesn't really fit into its own genres very well, because it doesn't work as a police movie, it doesn't really work as an action movie, it doesn't really work as a martial arts movie, and it's not actually an anime.
No.
Because it's live action. So it becomes this really interesting piece that I find infinitely fascinating and would love to... I'm going to revisit this at some point, because the style is through the chain. I love it. It's absolutely brilliant for that. But it's not... It's something that...
You just confused two sayings there.
Yeah, I did.
You started saying through
Off
the
the chain.
roof, and then you swapped to off the chain.
We're going through the chain, Jamie.
We are both off the we are both off the chain and through the roof.
Yeah. Or are we off the roof and through the chain? That sounds like a hanging.
That sounds like we're reviewing 50 Shades of Grey. Let's move on.
But yeah, the filmmakers have to see it, I think, really, because
it's very interesting editing techniques in it.
yeah,
it will
give you ideas on what you can do with cinema. And some of it I've not seen be done before or since. Some of it I have seen done, but in a different way. Not just talking about Matrix Revolution stealing shots. I mean, some more subtle stuff. Like, people have done better with comic book stuff with Sin City, etc. We've seen people do elements of this sort of stuff, like talking about police brutality, but in a way that is a little bit more refined than this.
Yeah.
But this is just a raw piece of cinematic intrigue. So for filmmakers, I think you've got to see it.
Yeah.
Anyone else, general audience, I can't think of who this would be for, though, because it doesn't fit neatly into any genre camp well enough. What about yourself?
And like you say, it's not readily available.
Yeah.
Like you've got to put a little bit of work into finding this film.
It is I know in America it's on Amazon Prime, but I don't think it is in the UK.
Just get a VPN.
You can still get the UK DVD for like £1.50 on Amazon, but like the quality of the image is awful. Like
nobody got a DVD player no more.
Yeah, well they've got Blu-ray player. They don't play DVDs.
Anyway, I think we're gonna wrap it up there.
Yeah.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us on this little trip to South Korea. I don't know what accent that was.
I don't know what that was either. It was
Welsh. It was like Scottish. South Korea.
South Korea was it? We'll see if the Scots think that it sounds Scottish.
So yeah, I think we're gonna wrap it up there. We'll see you guys next time on Second Take Cinema.